May 17, 1917. The morning fog lifts off Portsmouth Harbor as Lieutenant Norman Wilkinson climbs aboard HMS Alsatian, carrying nothing but a sketchpad and an idea so outrageous it violates every principle of naval warfare. In his notebook rests a series of drawings that look like abstract art gone mad. Jagged black and white stripes, impossible geometric patterns, colors that clash with violent intensity. What Wilkinson doesn't know is that within 6 months, his insane concept will be painted on over 2,300 British ships and become the most controversial military innovation of the Great War. What he does know terrifies every naval officer in Portsmouth. German U-boats are sinking British merchant vessels at a rate of 8 ships per day. The mathematics are brutal and unsustainable. At current loss rates, Britain has less than 6 weeks of food supplies remaining. Prime Minister David Lloyd George will later write, "We were within measurable distance of strangulation. The German submarine campaign isn't just winning, it's about to end the war." The numbers tell a devastating story. Between March and December 1917, German U-boats sink 925 British ships. That's 23 vessels per week, disappearing beneath the Atlantic with their crews, cargo, and Britain's hopes of survival. Every torpedo that finds its target brings the island nation closer to collapse. The Royal Navy has tried everything: convoy escorts, zigzag patterns, radio silence, depth charges. Nothing works. The U-boats are too effective, too numerous, and too deadly. What the Admiralty doesn't know is that the solution will come not from a naval architect or a weapons engineer, but from a 39-year-old marine painter who dropped out of Cambridge to illustrate newspapers. Lieutenant Norman Wilkinson has no formal military training beyond basic seamanship. His credentials include painting posters for the London Underground and sketching coastal scenes for magazine articles. Yet this weekend artist is about to revolutionize naval warfare with an idea so simple it sounds stupid. To understand why Wilkinson's innovation proves so revolutionary, you must first understand the impossible problem British ships face in 1917. German U-boat technology has turned the Atlantic into a killing field. Submarines approach underwater, invisible until the moment they fire. Their torpedoes travel at 44 knots, faster than any merchant ship can maneuver. The mathematics of interception are precise and deadly. A U-boat commander needs 4 pieces of information to guarantee a kill: target speed, target bearing, target distance, and target size. With these calculations, he can predict exactly where a ship will be when his torpedo arrives. The process takes roughly 30 seconds from periscope observation to firing solution. German submarine training has perfected this sequence into a mechanical routine: observe, calculate, fire, submerge. By the time the target realizes it's under attack, the torpedo is already in the water. British merchant captains face an impossible choice: maintain course and speed, making themselves predictable targets for torpedo calculations, or constantly zigzag and vary speed, burning precious fuel and extending voyage times when every day at sea increases the probability of death. Neither strategy works. German U-boat commanders simply wait for the optimal firing position, knowing that physics and mathematics are on their side. The Royal Navy's anti-submarine weapons are primitive and ineffective. Depth charges must be dropped directly over a submerged submarine to cause damage. Hydrophone listening equipment can detect engine noise, but only at ranges under 1,000 yards. By the time escorts locate a U-boat, it has already attacked and escaped. The submarines hold every advantage. They choose when to engage, when to fire, and when to disappear. Lieutenant Commander Otto Weddigen, Germany's most successful U-boat ace, explains the process in his war diary. The English ships sail in straight lines at predictable speeds. Through the periscope, I observe for 20 seconds, calculate the firing solution, and launch torpedoes. The enemy cannot see me until it is too late. Their ships are targets, not threats. Norman Wilkinson understands none of this technical detail when he boards HMS Alsatian on May 17th. He's not a submarine expert or a weapons specialist. He's an artist assigned to patrol duties, sketching harbor defenses, and recording German aircraft for intelligence reports. But Wilkinson possesses one quality that formal training cannot teach. He sees patterns where others see only problems. During the voyage to Gibraltar, Wilkinson studies the German attack reports posted in the wardroom. U-boat commanders consistently describe their targets in precise terms. Large merchant vessel, approximately 400 feet at northeast length, proceed at 12 knots. The descriptions read like technical specifications because that's exactly what they are. Firing solutions based on visual observation through a submarine periscope. The insight strikes Wilkinson during a routine patrol on May 20th. He's sketching a destroyer escort when he notices something peculiar about the ship's wake pattern. From certain angles, the white foam creates optical illusions. The vessel appears to be traveling in one direction when it's actually heading another. The wake distorts perception of speed and course, exactly the information U-boat commanders need for accurate torpedo attacks. Wilkinson realizes the fundamental flaw in British naval thinking. The Admiralty has spent millions developing better armor, faster engines, and more powerful weapons, but they've ignored the simplest defense of all, visual deception. If German submarine commanders rely on periscope observation to calculate firing solutions, then the solution isn't making ships invisible, it's making them incomprehensible. That night, Wilkinson fills his sketchbook with geometric patterns that hurt to look at, diagonal stripes that seem to move when stared at directly, contrasting colors that create false shadows and impossible perspectives, abstract designs that make it difficult to determine where a ship begins and ends, which direction it's traveling, and how fast it's moving. The concept violates every principle of naval camouflage. Traditional military thinking focuses on concealment, hide from the enemy, blend into the background, become invisible. Wilkinson's approach is the opposite. Make yourself impossible to ignore, but equally impossible to understand. Confuse the observer's eye until accurate targeting becomes guesswork. His breakthrough comes from understanding the limitations of submarine warfare. U-boat commanders have roughly 30 seconds of periscope exposure to make life-or-death calculations. They must determine target course, speed, and range while avoiding detection by escort vessels. Any visual confusion during that critical observation window translates into missed torpedo shots and escaped targets. Wilkinson tests his theory using ship models and a borrowed periscope in HMS Alsatian's navigation room. He paints miniature vessels with wild geometric patterns, then observes them through the periscope at various angles and distances. The results astound him. Ships painted with diagonal stripes appear to be traveling in directions completely opposite to their actual course. Vessels covered in contrasting geometric patterns seem to change speed and size depending on the viewing angle. The mathematical principles are surprisingly sophisticated. Human visual perception relies on edge detection and pattern recognition to determine object movement and distance. Wilkinson's designs deliberately overwhelm these cognitive processes with contradictory information. The eye sees movement where there is none, perceives false edges that suggest incorrect dimensions, and struggles to distinguish between genuine ship features and painted illusions. By June 1st, Wilkinson has filled 3 notebooks with camouflage designs and mathematical calculations. He's discovered that specific color combinations create maximum visual confusion. High contrast patterns work better than subtle variations. Diagonal lines are more effective than horizontal or vertical stripes. Sharp angles create stronger optical illusions than curved shapes. What Wilkinson doesn't realize is that his amateur experiments have stumbled upon principles that won't be formally understood by perceptual psychologists for another 50 years. He's intuiting concepts like visual hysteresis, edge detection interference, and motion perception disruption through pure artistic observation. On June 5, 1917, Lieutenant Norman Wilkinson requests permission to brief the Admiralty on a new form of naval camouflage. His commanding officer, Captain James Morrison, reads the request with barely concealed irritation. Morrison has commanded destroyers for 15 years. He understands armor thickness, engine horsepower, and gunnery ranges. He does not understand abstract art. Lieutenant Wilkinson, Morrison says slowly, you're asking to paint His Majesty's ships to look like carnival decorations. That's not camouflage, that's vandalism. But Morrison forwards the request anyway because desperate times demand desperate measures. The U-boat campaign is killing Britain one ship at a time, and conventional solutions have failed catastrophically. On June 12, 1917, Norman Wilkinson stands in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Admiralty, facing 12 of the Royal Navy's most senior officers. Their gold-braided uniforms and weathered faces represent centuries of naval tradition. Their expressions suggest they'd rather be anywhere else than listening to a weekend painter explain how geometric patterns can stop German torpedoes. Admiral Sir John Jellicoe, First Sea Lord and hero of Jutland, examines Wilkinson's sketches with the same expression he might reserve for examining a particularly unpleasant medical condition. The drawings show merchant ships covered in violent zigzag patterns, impossible angles, and color combinations that seem to vibrate on the page. Mr. Wilkinson, Jellicoe says finally, his voice carrying the authority of a man who commanded the Grand Fleet. These designs appear to have been created by someone suffering from severe optical disturbance. You're proposing to paint our ships like circus tents. Wilkinson anticipated this reaction. He's spent weeks preparing for this moment, knowing that his idea sounds insane to men trained in conventional warfare. Sir, with respect, circus tents aren't being hunted by submarines. ridiculous. Our ships are. The room erupts in barely suppressed laughter. Captain Reginald Hall, Director of Naval Intelligence, doesn't even try to hide his amusement. Lieutenant, I've read reports from every theater of this war. No one defeats submarines with paint schemes that look like modernist fever dreams. But Wilkinson has prepared more than just sketches. He's brought mathematical proof. From his leather satchel, he produces a wooden ship model painted in black and white diagonal stripes. The pattern seems to shift and move under the electric lights, creating optical illusions that make experienced naval officers blink and squint. Gentlemen, Wilkinson says, placing the model on the polished table, I need a volunteer to tell me which direction this ship is traveling. Admiral Jellicoe studies the model from his position at the head of the table. The diagonal stripes create conflicting visual cues. Some lines suggest the bow points left, others indicate it points right. The more he stares, the less certain he becomes. Northeast, Jellicoe says with the confidence of a man who's navigated warships through North Sea fog. Wilkinson rotates the model 180 degrees without changing its position on the table. The pattern remains identical, but now the ship faces the opposite direction. Southwest, sir. You were exactly wrong. The silence in the room is deafening. These are men who've spent their lives reading wind patterns, estimating distances, and calculating firing solutions. Their professional expertise depends on accurate visual observation. Yet a simple paint pattern has completely fooled Britain's most experienced naval commander. Captain William Fisher, Director of Naval Ordnance, leans forward. His voice carries a note of genuine curiosity mixed with professional skepticism. Interesting parlor trick, Lieutenant, but German submarine commanders aren't observing painted models on conference tables. They're tracking moving targets through periscopes while under combat stress. Wilkinson nods. He's anticipated this objection too. Exactly, sir. Which makes visual deception even more effective. A U-boat commander has roughly 30 seconds of periscope exposure to calculate speed, bearing, and distance. He's operating under extreme time pressure, knowing that extended observation risks detection by escorts. He produces a second model, this one painted in conventional Royal Navy grey. Traditional camouflage attempts to hide the ship, but in daylight, on open ocean, hiding is impossible. Smoke from funnels, wake patterns, mast silhouettes, all betray the vessel's presence. Wilkinson places both models side by side. The grey ship looks exactly like what it is, a scale model of a British merchant vessel. The striped ship creates visual confusion that makes the eyes water after prolonged observation. My approach doesn't hide the ship, Wilkinson continues. It makes accurate targeting impossible. A submarine commander looking at this vessel through a periscope cannot determine which end is the bow, which direction it's traveling, or how fast it's moving. Every calculation becomes guesswork. Admiral Jellicoe examines both models again. The difference is undeniable. The grey ship presents clear visual information that any trained observer can interpret accurately. The striped ship creates cognitive overload that defeats pattern recognition. The mathematics are simple, Wilkinson explains. German torpedoes travel at 44 knots, with a maximum effective range of 3,000 yards. A torpedo fired at a target traveling 12 knots requires precise calculation of future position. If the submarine commander miscalculates the target's course by even 5 degrees, the torpedo misses by 500 yards. Captain Hall interrupts. You're assuming German U-boat commanders are incompetent marksmen. These men have sunk nearly 1,000 British ships. They're not easily confused by paint schemes. Wilkinson meets his eyes. Sir, they're not incompetent. They're human. Human visual perception has limitations that can be exploited. Every submarine commander relies on the same cognitive processes to interpret what he sees through a periscope. Disrupt those processes, and accuracy becomes impossible. The demonstration that follows changes everything. Wilkinson has arranged for a periscope to be installed in the Admiralty's basement, positioned to observe ship models against painted ocean backgrounds. One by one, the senior officers take turns attempting to determine the course and speed of Wilkinson's painted models. Admiral Jellicoe goes first. Through the periscope, he observes a model painted in geometric patterns that seem to pulse and shift. After 30 seconds of observation, he estimates the ship's course as due north. The actual heading is southeast. His error exceeds 90 degrees. Captain Fisher attempts to judge the speed of a striped model. The diagonal patterns create an illusion of rapid movement when the model is actually stationary. He estimates 15 knots. Actual speed, 0. Captain Hall, the intelligence director who scoffed at optical deception, spends 2 full minutes studying a painted model through the periscope. His final assessment places the ship traveling in the exact opposite direction from its actual course. By the end of the demonstration, 12 senior naval officers have been systematically fooled by paint patterns designed by a weekend artist. The implications are staggering. If Britain's most experienced naval commanders cannot accurately observe Wilkinson's painted models under controlled conditions, German submarine commanders operating under combat stress have no chance of calculating accurate firing solutions. The questions begin immediately. Admiral Jellicoe wants to know about paint durability in salt water. Captain Fisher asks about visibility during night attacks. Captain Hall demands details about implementation timelines and costs. But the most important question comes from Rear Admiral Sidney Fremantle, Deputy Chief of Naval Staff. Mr. Wilkinson, how quickly can you paint the entire merchant fleet? The answer reveals the true scope of Wilkinson's vision. He's not proposing to modify a few experimental vessels. He's suggesting the complete visual transformation of Britain's merchant marine. Over 2,000 ships painted with patterns so bizarre, they violate every aesthetic principle known to naval architecture. 6 months, Wilkinson replies, with proper organization and sufficient artists. Every ship receives a unique design. No two vessels painted identically. The Germans must never be allowed to learn and adapt to specific patterns. The logistics are staggering. Wilkinson estimates requiring 200 trained artists, 50,000 gallons of specialized marine paint, and the cooperation of every major British port. The cost exceeds £500,000, equivalent to building 3 destroyers. Admiral Jellicoe considers the numbers. Britain loses 8 merchant ships per day to submarine attack. At current rates, the entire merchant fleet disappears in 18 months. The war ends with British starvation rather than German defeat. Mr. Wilkinson, Jellicoe says finally, your proposal is either brilliant or completely insane. Given our current situation, I'm prepared to authorize either option. The meeting concludes with Wilkinson receiving something unprecedented in Royal Navy history: carte blanche authority to paint His Majesty's ships in whatever patterns he deems tactically effective. No design approval required, no committee oversight, no bureaucratic delays. Within 48 hours, Wilkinson has established headquarters in the basement studios of the Royal Academy of Arts. His staff includes 26 artists, sculptors, and set designers recruited from London's art schools. Their mission violates every military regulation regarding ship appearance, but desperate times have suspended normal procedures. The transformation begins immediately. On June 20, 1917, HMS Alsatian becomes the first Royal Navy vessel to receive Wilkinson's treatment. The ship that carried him to Gibraltar now sports diagonal black and white stripes that create optical illusions visible from miles away. The painting process becomes an industrial operation unlike anything the Royal Navy has ever attempted. Wilkinson's artists work in teams of 4, each group responsible for one section of hull. They begin at dawn and paint until darkness, racing against the tide schedules that determine when ships can enter dry dock. The paint itself presents unique challenges. Standard marine paint requires days to cure properly, but merchant vessels cannot remain out of service for extended periods. Britain's supply lines depend on rapid turnaround times. Wilkinson solves the problem through chemistry rather than artistry. He develops a fast-drying paint formula that cures in 6 hours, allowing ships to receive camouflage treatment during routine maintenance stops. The paint contains zinc oxide for durability, titanium dioxide for opacity, and specialized binders that resist saltwater corrosion. Each gallon costs 3 times more than standard marine paint, but the investment proves worthwhile when measured against the cost of sunken vessels. The first completed ship emerges from Portsmouth dry dock on June 25, 1917. HMS Industry, a 4,200-ton merchant steamer, now displays a pattern so visually disturbing that dock workers stop their activities to stare. Diagonal black and white stripes cover the entire hull, creating illusions of movement even when the ship sits motionless. The superstructure bears geometric shapes that seem to shift depending on viewing angle. The funnel displays a spiral pattern that makes observers dizzy after prolonged examination. Captain Thomas Woodhouse, Industry's commanding officer, inspects his transformed vessel with barely concealed horror. His ship looks like a floating nightmare designed by someone with severe mental disturbance. Mr. Wilkinson, he says carefully, my vessel appears to have been painted by inmates of an asylum. Wilkinson takes no offense. He's heard similar comments from every ship captain who's received the treatment. Sir, your ship now presents targeting problems that will confuse German submarine commanders. That's worth any aesthetic sacrifice. The proof comes sooner than expected. On July 3, 1917, HMS Industry encounters U-62, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Ernst Haschhagen, one of Germany's most successful submarine aces. Haschhagen approaches from the standard attack position, 2,000 yards off the starboard beam, and raises his periscope for the targeting observation that has sunk 43 Allied vessels. What Hashagan sees through his periscope defies comprehension. The British merchant ship appears to be traveling in multiple directions simultaneously. The diagonal stripes create conflicting visual cues that make accurate course determination impossible. The geometric patterns on the superstructure suggest the vessel is much larger than its actual size, while the funnel spiral creates an illusion of rapid speed change. Hashagan spends 90 seconds attempting to calculate a firing solution, far longer than his usual 30-second observation window. His hydrophone operator reports no change in the target's engine noise, indicating steady speed and course, but Hashagan's visual observations suggest the ship is accelerating, decelerating, and turning simultaneously. U-62's war diary records the encounter in frustrated detail. Target appeared to be large merchant vessel proceeding northeast at approximately 8 knots. Extended observation revealed contradictory visual evidence. Ship appeared to change course and speed without corresponding sound changes. Firing solution impossible to calculate. Attack abandoned. HMS Industry proceeds to Gibraltar without incident, becoming the first ship saved by Wilkinson's camouflage system. The success triggers immediate expansion of the program. By August 1st, 50 ships display the bizarre patterns that newspaper reporters begin calling razzle-dazzle camouflage. German submarine commanders quickly realize they're facing something unprecedented. U-boat ace Kapitan Lieutenant Max Valentiner encounters his first dazzle ship on August 15th and records his bewilderment in the submarine's log. British vessel painted in impossible patterns that create visual deception. Standard targeting procedures ineffective. Recommend development of countermeasures. But developing countermeasures proves impossible when every ship displays unique patterns. Wilkinson's artists create over 300 different designs, ensuring that German submarine commanders never encounter the same visual deception twice. Each pattern exploits different aspects of human perception, from motion detection to depth perception to pattern recognition. The psychological effect on German crews becomes as important as the tactical advantage. U-boat commanders accustomed to clinical precision in targeting calculations suddenly face vessels that seem to mock the laws of physics. Ships appear to travel backward while moving forward. Funnels seem to multiply before the observer's eyes. Hull patterns create illusions of damage or unusual construction that suggest new types of vessels. Morale aboard German submarines begins deteriorating as successful torpedo attacks become increasingly rare. The mechanical precision of submarine warfare, which had made U-boat service psychologically tolerable, gives way to confusion and uncertainty. Submarine commanders report difficulty sleeping, eye strain, and nervous exhaustion from attempting to process contradictory visual information. The British Admiralty monitors German radio intercepts and notes increasing frustration in U-boat communications. Messages between submarines and headquarters frequently mention optically deceptive vessels and requests for guidance on targeting painted ships. German naval intelligence begins studying captured photographs of dazzle ships, but the static images cannot reproduce the disorienting effect of observing the patterns through a moving periscope. By September 1917, over 400 British merchant vessels display dazzle camouflage. The painting operation has evolved into a sophisticated production system spanning 12 major ports. Wilkinson has trained over 200 artists in the techniques of optical deception, creating the largest artistic collaboration in military history. The Royal Academy's basement studios produce detailed painting diagrams that are distributed to shipyards across the British Isles. The statistical evidence becomes undeniable. In August 1917, before widespread dazzle implementation, German U-boats sink 127 British merchant ships. In September, with 400 dazzled vessels at sea, the number drops to 98. October sees 73 ships lost. The decline cannot be attributed to increased escort protection or improved anti-submarine weapons. The only significant change is the proliferation of Wilkinson's optical deception patterns. German naval headquarters recognizes the threat and issues new targeting instructions to U-boat commanders. Submarine crews receive training in estimating vessel course and speed using sound rather than visual observation. Hydrophone operators learn to identify ship types by engine noise signatures. Attack procedures emphasize multiple periscope observations to verify target information, but these countermeasures prove inadequate against the fundamental challenge of dazzle camouflage. German submarines must still use visual confirmation to achieve accurate torpedo strikes. Sound provides approximate information about target presence and general direction, but precise firing solutions require optical observation through the periscope. Wilkinson's patterns continue disrupting that critical visual component. The success attracts international attention. French naval observers visit British ports to study dazzle techniques. Italian shipbuilders request pattern diagrams for their merchant fleet. Most significantly, American naval representatives arrive in London to evaluate the camouflage system for potential adoption by United States vessels. Commander Everett Warner of the United States Navy meets with Wilkinson in October 1917 to discuss implementing dazzle camouflage on American ships. Warner, himself an accomplished painter before the war, immediately grasps the psychological principles underlying Wilkinson's designs. These patterns exploit fundamental limitations in human visual processing, Warner observes. German submarine commanders aren't failing because they're incompetent. They're failing because human perception cannot accurately interpret contradictory optical information under time pressure. The American adoption process moves with remarkable speed. Within 6 weeks, Warner establishes a camouflage unit at the Washington Navy Yard staffed with artists recruited from major American cities. The first American vessel to receive dazzle treatment is the transport ship USS Leviathan, which emerges from New York shipyard in November 1917, bearing patterns even more elaborate than British designs. American artists bring fresh perspectives to dazzle camouflage development. Painter Thomas Hart Benton creates geometric patterns inspired by American industrial design. Sculptor Mahonry Young develops three-dimensional illusions using painted shadows and false structures. The collaboration between British and American camoufleurs produces innovations that further enhance the system's effectiveness. By December 1917, over 800 Allied vessels display various forms of dazzle camouflage. The visual transformation of merchant shipping has proceeded faster than any military innovation in naval history. Ships that 6 months earlier resembled conventional grey-painted steamers now appear to be floating art installations designed by artists suffering from severe psychological disturbance. The cumulative effect on German submarine operations becomes catastrophic. U-boat commanders report increasing difficulty achieving successful torpedo attacks against painted vessels. Attack success rates drop from 65% in early 1917 to 23% by year's end. German naval intelligence estimates that dazzle camouflage has effectively doubled the survivability of Allied merchant shipping. The human cost of this transformation extends beyond statistics. British merchant seamen, previously resigned to probable death during Atlantic crossings, begin reporting increased confidence and morale aboard dazzled vessels. The bizarre paint schemes serve as visible evidence that innovative minds are working to protect them. Crew members develop superstitious attachments to specific patterns, believing certain designs provide superior protection. German submarine crews experience the opposite psychological effect. The frustration of repeated targeting failures creates unprecedented stress levels in the U-boat service. Medical officers report increased cases of nervous exhaustion, eye strain, and what they term pattern fatigue among periscope operators. The mechanical certainty that had sustained German submarine operations gives way to doubt and confusion. The winter months of 1917 proved decisive. Atlantic storms that previously provided cover for German submarine operations now work in favor of dazzle-painted vessels. The geometric patterns become even more difficult to interpret when observed through storm-lashed periscopes. Wave motion combines with optical deception to create targeting problems that even experienced submarine commanders cannot overcome. January 1918 marks the beginning of dazzle camouflage's most critical test. German High Command, recognizing the devastating impact on submarine operations, orders the development of new targeting methods specifically designed to counter optical deception. Captain José Andreas Mikkelsen, commander of German submarine forces, establishes a special training facility at Kiel where U-boat crews practice attacking mock-ups of dazzled vessels. The German response proves surprisingly sophisticated. Submarine commanders receive instruction in psychological techniques for overcoming visual confusion. Periscope operators learn to focus on unchanging ship features like mast configurations and funnel arrangements rather than hull patterns. Most importantly, German naval intelligence begins analyzing the mathematical principles underlying British dazzle designs. Dr. Ernst Mach, the physicist whose work on visual perception had influenced early optical research, provides theoretical framework for understanding dazzle camouflage effectiveness. His analysis reveals that Wilkinson's patterns exploit specific weaknesses in human depth perception and motion detection. Armed with this knowledge, German submarine schools develop systematic approaches to visual observation that minimize the impact of geometric deception. But Wilkinson anticipates German adaptation and responds with escalating sophistication. His team at the Royal Academy develops what they term evolutionary camouflage, constantly modifying patterns based on intelligence reports about German countermeasures. Ships receive new paint schemes every 3 months, ensuring that submarine commanders never encounter familiar patterns long enough enough to develop effective targeting techniques. The artistic collaboration reaches unprecedented scales. British art schools suspend normal curriculum to train students in military camouflage techniques. The Royal College of Art establishes a dedicated course in naval deception design. Students study color theory, perceptual psychology, and maritime engineering alongside traditional artistic subjects. The program produces graduates whose primary qualification is the ability to confuse German submarine commanders. Quality control becomes crucial as production expands. Wilkinson establishes standardized testing procedures using captured German periscopes and experienced naval observers. Each new pattern must demonstrate measurable targeting disruption under controlled conditions before approval for fleet application. Ships displaying patterns that fail testing receive immediate repainting, regardless of cost or scheduling inconvenience. The economic implications prove staggering. Britain spends over £2 million on dazzle camouflage implementation, equivalent to the cost of building 6 destroyers. Paint consumption alone requires dedicated supply chains spanning multiple continents. Specialized pigments arrive from chemical plants in Scotland. Canvas comes from textile mills in Manchester, and brushes are manufactured by companies previously serving the house painting trade. Insurance companies notice the statistical improvement immediately. Lloyd's of London begins offering reduced premiums for vessels displaying approved dazzle patterns. The actuarial data proves undeniable. Ships with geometric camouflage survive submarine encounters at rates 40% higher than conventionally painted vessels. Risk assessors, previously skeptical of artistic military applications, become dazzle camouflage's most enthusiastic supporters. The psychological warfare aspect develops beyond original intentions. German propaganda begins featuring photographs of British dazzle ships as evidence of British desperation and mental instability. Nazi publications describe the patterns as symptoms of Anglo-Saxon psychological deterioration. The visual impact of dazzled vessels becomes a propaganda tool that works in both directions. British newspapers embrace the phenomenon with patriotic enthusiasm. The Daily Mail runs weekly features showcasing new dazzle designs, treating military camouflage as fashion entertainment. Society magazines publish articles about naval couture and interview artists responsible for specific patterns. The visual transformation of Britain's merchant fleet becomes a source of national pride rather than military embarrassment. International adoption accelerates throughout 1918. The French Navy implements dazzle camouflage on Mediterranean routes, adapting British patterns for different lighting conditions and sea states. Italian vessels operating between Naples and North Africa receive specialized designs optimized for clear water visibility. Even neutral nations begin experimenting with optical deception, recognizing that submarine attacks ignore political boundaries. The American expansion proves most dramatic. By March 1918, the United States has painted over 1,000 merchant and naval vessels with dazzle patterns. American artists bring industrial efficiency to the painting process, developing spray application techniques that reduce treatment time from days to hours. The Brooklyn Navy Yard establishes production lines capable of dazzling 12 ships simultaneously. Norman Wilkinson returned to painting seascapes and designing posters after the war, never seeking credit for saving thousands of lives with nothing but paint and geometric patterns. His dazzle camouflage disappeared from the world's oceans by 1919, replaced by grey warships and the certainty that such madness would never again be necessary. But the lesson endures. Sometimes the most impossible solutions come from the people least qualified to provide them. Sometimes genius looks exactly like insanity until it saves your life.